Harley Davidons thought they could squeeze loyal riders for everything and get away with it. But the truth is finally out. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how they played you and why thousands of riders are already walking away. The price hike that betrayed a brotherhood. For decades, Harley-Davidson meant something more than chrome, horsepower, or even the rumble of a V-twin engine. To many working-class Americans, owning a Harley was a rite of passage, proof that you had earned a piece of freedom on your own terms. But that trust, that emotional connection has now been shaken to its core. Riders who once bled Harley orange and black are reeling from a series of pricing decisions that feel less like business as usual and more like betrayal. It started subtly, a few $100s added to the sticker price, a quiet increase in destination fees. But over time, that slow boil turned into full-blown price inflation. Longtime riders report walking into dealerships expecting to pay $20,000 for a new Softail or Road Glide, only to walk out staring at paperwork that ballooned to $30,000 or more. And it was not just the price tag. It was how those prices were framed, disguised behind language like market adjustment, dealer markup, and premium prep package. For the guys who've been riding since the 90s or earlier, this wasn't just a financial shock, it was an identity crisis. These were men and women who skipped vacations, worked overtime, and saved for years to afford the bike they always dreamed of. They didn't expect to be treated like naive first-timers, but that's exactly how many feel now. Played. As one Michigan rider put it in a forum post, they sold us brotherhood, then turned around and treated us like a mark. And as prices climbed and loyalty was tested, a darker financial trap was already being set. But not everyone walked into this storm with eyes wide open. Some were lured in by a dream, only to find themselves buried in debt. If you felt burned by a dealership or know someone who has, hit like and drop your story in the comments. You're not alone, and the more voices we have, the harder we are to ignore. A dream on two wheels or a debt sentence. To 24-year-old Mason, buying a Harley was more than a bucket list goal. It was personal redemption. He had just landed his first steady job and wanted to reward himself with something that made him feel free, confident, and in control. The blacked-out Sportster on the showroom floor was perfect. Sleek, loud, rebellious. A salesman approached, nodded at the bike, and said, "We can get you on that today." What Mason didn't realize, and what so many young buyers have since learned the hard way, is that the real cost wasn't in the bike's base price. It was buried in the loan agreement. Mason signed on to a 6-year financing plan at over 12% interest. The monthly payment seemed doable, just under $400. What he didn't understand was how quickly that interest would stack up. By the time he finishes paying, he will have shelled out over $37,000 for a motorcycle that depreciates faster than he can pay it off. Worse, many buyers like Mason were told they could refinance later once their credit improved or equity built up. But the truth is, Harley bikes drop in value too fast. Within 2 years, most are worth less than what's still owed, making refinancing nearly impossible. Mason now finds himself stuck. He still loves the way the bike looks, the feeling of being part of something bigger. But the thrill has been replaced by a kind of slow-burning dread. It was supposed to be freedom, he says, but now it just feels like a chain. And for many, the trap was not even set by the bank. It was engineered inside the dealership itself. Because behind the polished chrome and patriotic slogans, some employees were quietly pressured to help seal the deal, no matter the ethics. Don't ride into the storm unprepared. We pick the only gear we actually trust: helmets, gloves, tools, all linked in the description below. The real cost wasn't on the price tag. Brian spent nearly a decade working the finance desk at a major Harley dealership in Texas. At first, he believed in the product. He loved bikes, loved the culture, and genuinely thought he was helping people ride off into their dreams. But over time, that pride gave way to a gnawing guilt. It stopped being about bikes, he says. It became about maximizing every customer's payment. Behind closed doors, finance managers like Brian were trained to insert extra charges wherever possible. These weren't always dishonest. but they were often invisible. Service contracts riders didn't ask for, protection plans that duplicated their insurance, delivery fees padded beyond actual costs, and worst of all, making sure the customer never truly saw the final cost until the very end, when signing felt inevitable. The dealership didn't pressure him to lie, but they did pressure him to upsell. It was not unusual for a $22,000 motorcycle to become a $31,000 transaction by the time financing closed. "We weren't just selling bikes," Brian says. "We were selling illusions, and the customer was always the last to know." Eventually, he quit. The job started making him sick. And yet, the tactics he left behind are still being used in showrooms across the country. They depend on one thing: emotion clouding caution. But even that was not enough. Dealers went further. They learned how to generate urgency out of thin air. And to do that, they created a fiction of false scarcity that pushed buyers into panic mode. How Harley dealerships faked a shortage. Harley dealerships were supposed to be cathedrals of choice, rows of models, gleaming and ready for the open road. But something strange began happening in the last 5 years. Shoppers would walk in, ask about a model they saw online, and hear the same response. "That one's sold." Or, "We had one in last week, but it's gone now. Only a few left nationwide." The implication? Act now or miss out forever. But behind the scenes, inventory managers like Sarah knew the truth. Those sold tags were often placed on bikes that were still available or never existed at all. It was part of a subtle psychological trick to make customers believe they were in a high-demand, low-supply environment. Scarcity sells. It creates urgency. And when someone thinks they might miss their only shot, they stop asking questions and start signing contracts. Dealers even began hiding popular models in back rooms, showing them only to buyers who qualified or showed enough eagerness. The strategy worked. Bikes that might have sat idle moved quickly, and buyers often agreed to markups just to secure what they thought was a rare opportunity. But in time, the illusion cracked. Riders started talking. Forums lit up with stories that sounded suspiciously similar, and what used to be excitement turned into suspicion. "I realized I was bidding against myself," one writer said. "There was no shortage, just a performance." And once enough people saw behind the curtain, the damage couldn't be undone. The brotherhood wasn't gone, but it had been tested. And the pushback? That was just getting started. Showrooms full, pockets empty. For David, owning a Harley-Davidson dealership in Central Florida used to be a badge of pride. Riders lined up every spring, trade-ins flowed, financing contracts were signed like clockwork. But now, walking into his gleaming showroom feels like entering a mausoleum. The bikes are all still there, rows of cruisers and tourers polished to perfection. But the customers? Gone. Inventory that once turned over in 60 days now sits for 6 months or longer. David had banked on the idea that price hikes wouldn't slow demand. He was wrong. Every day he watches as interest payments accumulate on unsold bikes he can't move. For every shiny road glide gathering dust, there's a loan bill waiting on his desk. At first he slashed prices, hoping to restart the flow, but buyers weren't biting. The damage ran deeper than affordability. It was about trust. Customers didn't just feel priced out, they felt manipulated. Many were turning to used markets, buying directly from fellow riders. The sense of urgency dealerships once wielded as a sales weapon was now being used against them. And so David, like dozens of other owners, finds himself drowning in the inventory he once counted as profit. The freedom machine has stalled, and the financial pressure is becoming unbearable. And while the bikes sat silent, those working the sales floor were pushed to the brink. The commission. Cuts that broke the sales floor. At first, Michelle tried to ride the storm out. She was a top-performing salesperson at a Midwest Harley dealership and had survived slow seasons before. But this time, it wasn't a dip. It was a nosedive. And management made it clear. The pressure to sell had never been higher, while the reward for doing so had never been lower. Commissions were slashed. To keep the lights on, they said. The structured incentives that once padded her paychecks disappeared overnight. Floor traffic dried up, When buyers did walk in, they were cautious, skeptical, and armed with knowledge from forums and YouTube exposés. Michelle found herself doing everything: closing deals, fielding service questions, even mopping the showroom without seeing the return. Meanwhile, her base salary remained frozen. She watched younger coworkers burn out fast, quitting after 3 months or less. "It stopped being about motorcycles," she said. "It became survival mode." Gone was the thrill of matching a rider to their dream machine. Now it was all about squeezing out deals, fast talking through hesitations, and pushing packages she didn't even believe in anymore. At night, she scrolled job boards. During the day, she plastered on a smile. The collapse wasn't just economic, it was personal. The place she once loved working had become a slow-motion burnout. But for some employees, survival meant more than commissions. It meant resistance. "They tried to silence us, and that's when we got loud." For Jordan, wrenching on Harleys wasn't just a job, it was family tradition. He worked in the service department at a regional dealership, proud to keep the bikes running for the community he loved. But as inventory piled up and sales slowed, the pressure on staff became suffocating. Schedules grew erratic. Overtime hours went unpaid. One by one, his coworkers were either laid off or pushed harder. When Jordan and a few colleagues floated the idea of unionizing to advocate for stable hours and better pay, management's tone shifted instantly. First came the warnings: unions don't belong here. Then came the retaliation: shift changes, write-ups, cold shoulders. Management began watching everything. One tech was fired over a minor scheduling error. It didn't feel like coincidence. But instead of breaking the movement, those tactics lit a fuse. Jordan turned to social media, sharing their stories. Soon, riders, many already angry at the dealerships, began voicing support. Local community groups picked it up. A regional news outlet ran a segment. The dealership tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. Across other dealerships, whispers of similar organizing began. Employees were no longer afraid to speak. They were done being exploited. What started in one garage was beginning to echo nationwide. And just as that worker movement gained traction, lawmakers delivered the biggest blow yet. Lawmakers finally showed up with a wrecking ball. For years, Harley Davidson dealerships operated in a legal gray zone, tacking on hidden fees, burying deceptive loan terms, and relying on emotional sales pressure. Complaints trickled in, but regulators remained silent. That silence shattered in 2024. Stephanie Owens, a consumer protection official in California, had seen enough. Her office launched an investigation into multiple motorcycle dealerships after receiving a wave of formal grievances. What they found was staggering: pricing games, fake shortages, and financing plans with interest rates as high as 15%, targeting first-time buyers with no financial safety net. California passed sweeping legislation banning non-disclosed market adjustments and capping allowable interest rates on recreational vehicle loans. Texas, New York, and Michigan followed. The Federal Trade Commission opened its own inquiry. And suddenly, dealerships found themselves scrambling to rewrite policies or face millions in penalties. Dealership associations pushed back, warning that small businesses would collapse. But the public was unmoved. The stories of financial ruin, riders buried in $40,000 bike loans, sparked outrage. Stephanie called it a reckoning long overdue. For her, it wasn't about crushing dealers, it was about restoring balance. People trusted these brands, they trusted these showrooms, and that trust was shattered for profit. What had once been seen as isolated bad actors was now exposed as a system-wide scheme, and the legal hammer had only just begun to swing. They turned forums into firepower. Before 2020, most Harley forums were just places to trade tips on chrome upgrades or weekend routes. But after the dealership scandals broke wide open, they became something more: a digital uprising. Jaylene ran one of the largest Harley owner groups on social media. He used to moderate arguments about exhaust systems. Now he was helping riders decode loan documents and expose shady sales tactics. The tone had changed. Riders weren't just complaining, they were organizing. Posts went viral dissecting inflated fees, comparing dealer prices across state lines, and warning others of common tricks. Riders began sharing screenshots of contracts, highlighting hidden interest and phantom charges. It was no longer about a bad experience. It was about blowing the lid off a rigged system. Guides were compiled, hashtags spread. Dealers who crossed the line got named and shamed, their reputations torched by grassroots reviews. Riders coached one another on walking away from manipulative offers and finding better options. What had been a scattered frustration now became a coordinated resistance. These digital spaces turned into weapons, arming riders with knowledge, community, and strategy. And unlike dealerships, these forums weren't selling anything. They were giving the power back. But some riders didn't stop at resisting the system. They found a way to bypass it entirely. Buy direct, ride free. Leo never wanted a fight, he just wanted a bike. But after spending weeks bouncing between dealerships, each one more slippery than the last, he had enough. He turned to the web and discovered a whole new way to ride. Online-only brands, electric startups, and factory direct options were changing everything. Leo didn't have to step into a showroom. He could customize, finance, and ship his motorcycle straight to his door. No phantom fees, no pressure, just transparency. Apps let him compare offers in real time. Forums flagged red flags in loan terms. When one company tried to tack on a vague delivery surcharge, he caught it instantly and moved on. He wasn't just buying smarter, he was buying free. That freedom rippled. Riders like Leo began teaching others how to break away from the dealership model. Videos surfaced walking viewers through direct-to-consumer strategies. More manufacturers embraced it, seeing that riders craved honesty over flash. For a new generation of bikers, this wasn't just convenience, it was rebellion. Escaping the dealership meant escaping the system that had taken advantage of so many. The ride didn't feel corporate anymore. It felt earned. And for Leo, every mile was a reminder that the road to freedom didn't start at a dealership's front door. It started by skipping it altogether. And for some, the rebellion took an even more visceral form, through the roar of vintage engines. Vintage bikes became weapons of rebellion. Nina's garage wasn't flashy. No neon signs or touchscreen kiosks. Just tools, oil-stained manuals, and rows of bikes that looked like they'd rolled out of 1978. But lately her business was booming. Riders who once drooled over the latest Harleys were now hunting for used bikes with character and grit. Not because they were cheap, though they were, but because they represented something pure. Every scratched tank and custom carburetor was a middle finger to inflated prices and digital dashboards. Nina saw it happen in real time. Riders buying old bikes, fixing them up, and refusing to play by the dealership's rules. Her garage became a haven. Riders traded parts, shared knowledge, and resurrected machines that outlasted hype cycles. These bikes weren't just tools of transportation, they were weapons in a quiet rebellion. And they were beautiful. Clean lines, raw engines, simplicity that didn't need software updates or 5-year loans. Riders took pride not just in the ride, but in the work. They controlled every bolt. For Nina, every finished rebuild was a story of ownership, not just of the bike, but of the rider's power. Dealerships sold dreams. Her garage helped people build them. But it wasn't just bikes that were being rebuilt. It was the very soul of motorcycle culture. The culture Harley lost and the riders who rebuilt it. Harley-Davidson once owned the riding culture, but as prices soared and trust collapsed, something happened that the brand never saw coming. The riders took it back. Diego, a club leader in the Southwest, watched it unfold. Attendance at corporate-backed events was down, but the local meetups, overflowing. Vintage rallies, wrench and ride weekends, and garage potlucks replaced showroom unveilings. These gatherings weren't about sales, they were about stories. Riders swapping routes, helping each other fix busted gearboxes, teaching new riders the unspoken code of the road. Diego's group started hosting what they called heritage rides, celebrating older bikes, simpler times, and the brotherhood that once defined the lifestyle. No dealer sponsors, no glossy banners, just riders, roads, and respect. The shift wasn't accidental. Riders were rejecting what Harley had become, a brand chasing margins instead of meaning. They wanted authenticity, not artificial scarcity. They craved community, not consumerism. Diego knew this wasn't just a phase, it was a movement. One forged in betrayal but powered by solidarity. The culture wasn't dead, it had just been hidden beneath years of marketing fluff. Now, rebuilt by those who truly loved it, it was more alive than ever. Other brands saw the fire and pivoted fast. By the time Harley-Davidson riders started sounding the alarm, other motorcycle manufacturers had already begun shifting gears. Royal Enfield executives noticed the unrest early. Rumblings of betrayal, backlash against bloated prices, and growing online calls to abandon legacy brands. While Harley clung to its inflated image, Royal Enfield, an Indian motorcycle, quietly pivoted. They scaled back on costly dealer markups and expanded direct-to-consumer options. Entry-level models returned to focus, bikes that offered simplicity and soul, not chrome for the sake of status. Royal Enfield leaned hard into affordability without sacrificing style. Indian responded with stripped-down cruisers that echoed Harley's own golden era, except with price tags that felt fair. Executives studied what Harley missed. Riders no longer just wanted prestige, they wanted value, freedom from debt traps, and authenticity. And when the dealership scandals exploded, Royal Enfield and Indian were ready. They ramped up marketing toward disenfranchised Harley owners and offered generous trade-in programs. One brand's misstep became another's opportunity. Showrooms that once echoed with idle Harleys now hummed with alternative options. In forums and garages, old loyalties were breaking. Riders weren't just shopping for new bikes, they were shopping for new homes. But just as competitors adapted to the shifting tide, international tensions began pouring gasoline on the fire. When trade wars hit the throttle. While Harley wrestled with exploding backlash at home, a global conflict brewed that made things exponentially worse. Trade wars, once just a buzzword on financial news, suddenly hit the pavement, and Harley was right in the crosshairs. As tariffs between the United States and Europe escalated, so did the cost of manufacturing and exporting bikes. A shipment of motorcycles that might have cleared customs with minimal hassle a year earlier now carried price hikes of several $1,000s. European buyers, once a loyal export base for Harley, balked at the cost. Factories overseas faced retaliatory duties. Assembly costs surged. To offset the bleeding, Harley tried shifting some production to Asia, but that backfired politically. Accusations flew. Harley was abandoning American workers, outsourcing its soul, betraying the very identity it marketed. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle used Harley as a punching bag. Some accused it of profiteering, others blasted it for failing to adapt domestically before moving abroad. Every decision sparked controversy. Every adjustment fueled another headline. Trade policy, once an abstract debate, now ripped into Harley's already fragile foundation. The company was no longer just losing market share, it was losing its place in the national story. Enjoying the deep dive into Harley's struggles? Don't miss what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button and stay informed. That instability didn't just scare lawmakers or bikers, it spooked the one group Harley couldn't afford to lose. Wall Street watched and walked away. The stock ticker told a story Harley couldn't spin. For years, Wall Street tolerated the company's glacial adaptation, trusting in brand loyalty to carry the load. But by the time forums ignited, union threats surfaced, and trade wars tightened the noose, investors had seen enough. One analyst put it plainly, Harley wasn't just behind the curve, it was racing in the wrong direction. Earnings calls grew grim. Dealers sat on unsold inventory. Financing portfolios looked toxic. Long-term debt surged while sales volumes plummeted. Each quarter brought more warning signs. Declining international sales, stagnant domestic growth, rising loan defaults. Institutional investors began to quietly offload shares. Mutual funds reweighted their portfolios. Day traders mocked the collapse on social media. Harley's stock, once a reliable blue-chip symbol of middle America, now hovered near multi-year lows. The deeper issue wasn't just numbers, it was narrative. Wall Street realized Harley had no clear plan, no digital strategy, no youth movement, no compelling reason for the next generation to buy in. The loyalty the company banked on had become its liability. And so investors walked, some cautiously, others with finality. The financial world had spoken. The market wasn't just skeptical, it was finished waiting. And with even its shareholders gone, Harley's only chance left was the one it should have taken years ago. Harley's last shot at redemption. No one at headquarters could deny it anymore. Harley Davidson was no longer coasting on heritage, it was on the brink. The backlash, the lawsuits, the abandoned dealerships, the fleeing investors, it all pointed to one choice: evolve or vanish. A task force was formed. Executives who had once dismissed affordability as brand dilution were forced to listen. One hard truth echoed in every meeting: they had priced out their future. The plan wasn't revolutionary, it was a return to roots. Simpler models, fewer gimmicks, cleaner pricing. Harley unveiled stripped-down cruisers, devoid of touchscreen fluff and designed for easy repair. They promised transparency, even posted full-price breakdowns online for the first time. To win back trust, Harley initiated a rider recovery campaign. Thousands of riders still locked in ballooning loans were offered partial buyouts or refinancing. Customer reps didn't sell, they apologized. Harley even extended olive branches to grassroots communities. Club leaders were brought in for feedback. Independent mechanics were offered training support, not competition. Harley pledged to support riding culture, not own it. But doubts remained. Was this a real transformation or a last-ditch branding exercise? In the parking lots of vintage rallies and community garages, old loyalties were hard to revive. Riders had found power without Harley. Redemption wasn't impossible. But for the first time in decades, Harley had to earn it. You've seen the cracks, the betrayal, and the fight to take it all back. This isn't just Harley, it's a warning. If you care about fairness, freedom, and what happens next, hit subscribe, because the next story we uncover, it might hit even closer to home.